It is easy to animate objects in Ignition by rotating them or changing the size and position dynamically. We typically do this with vector graphics. So let's say, for example, I draw an arrow on my screen. Any vector graphic has some properties down the bottom left that we can modify. We have an X, Y, width, height, and angle. The angle allows us to rotate it, we can change the width and height, and we can move that component around the screen. All we have to do is bind these properties to a tag or to an expression to get them to change dynamically. So for example, on my arrow, if I want to move it on the screen, I can actually bind the X and Y. So here I have a couple tags in my tag browser. I can take location X, drag it down to the X, and you can start seeing it actually move on my screen. If I take location Y tag and drag it down to the Y, you can see now it's changing both in X and in Y. We can do the exact same thing for the width and height. I can take a square, put that onto window, and I can bind the width here to location X, let's say, and the height to location Y, and you'll see that now the size is actually changing for that component dynamically. The third thing we can do is rotate objects on a screen. So we can use the angle property of the simple graphics, like for example I draw another arrow, and then I can go down here to my angle. I can actually bind that to something like, again, if I take location X, put it onto the angle, I'll start seeing it rotate here. Now, when we're rotating objects, rotation is from 0 to 360 degrees. Typically, we don't just bind it to a tag. Typically, what we have in a PLC is like a status, like 1 or 0 saying we're on or off. So like, for example, a fan. The fan's on, we want to see it rotating. If it's off, we don't want to see it rotating. So let's say I go up here to Tools in Symbol Factory and drag in a fan object, which is this one we have here. This is a good graphic here. The problem is you can see there's a lot of stuff that make up this particular graphic. What I want to do is actually ungroup this. I want to remove some of the pieces of it. So I'm going to delete some of the back parts, like the circle and all that. Just keep the actual fan here. So I'm going to select the fan, right click, and group it back together so I have one graphic here. Now in order to rotate this, of course, I'm going to bind the angle property to something. I don't have a tag here. All I have is a tag that says I'm 1 or 0, on or off. So what we can do is actually go and use a component we have at Ignition under the Miscellaneous tab called the timer. A timer is an invisible component of the runtime. You don't see it, but it allows us to go through a set of values. So here, for example, I can set the delay for the timer, how often we want this thing to run, at 250 milliseconds. Set the initial delay to 0, and then at the bottom we can figure out the step by and the bound. So I'm going to go, the bound's going to be 360 degrees. The step by here is, let's say we're going to go by 30 degrees every time. And then the value will automatically increment up for us up to 360 when the timer's running. So if I set this to running, you'll see the value going here stepping up. So what we want to do, of course, is bind our fan status to the running property. So I can just drag it down. Now you can see it'll be running based on this tag here. Then we go over here to our fan, and we actually then bind the angle property to a property on the screen, which is the timer's value. By doing so, when the timer's running, the fan will be rotating. And so that's all governed by the fan status tag here. So if I set this to 0, you'll see that it'll stop rotating. Set it back to 1, and it'll be rotating again. So we can really set up any kind of animation that we want on these components. A component has to have a property, X, Y, width, height, or angle, in order to be able to do this.